Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to another episode of Feed the Beast Revelation. And today is going to be kind of an exciting one. At least I think so, because today is going to be the day that we work on our first real building here in our city project. I guess excluding our dam over here, of course, though this is still massively unfinished and also not much of a building. It's more so an aesthetic thing. But what we're going to be doing today is making our first real build and our first bit of actual functionality in our project. So, the purpose of this building that we're going to be creating is to get us into a specific mod, and that mod is Immersive Engineering. Now, Immersive Engineering, as you may recall, because we have looked at it before, very, very briefly, is I guess I would say an Industrial Revolution-esque mod. Essentially, right? There's a lot of really big, heavy machinery builds. There's like conveyor belts. There's hanging wires to transmit energy. All kinds of cool stuff like that. It's also got like a very slight steampunky vibe with things like water wheels and windmills and whatnot in this kind of particular aesthetic that it has. And that aesthetic is actually going to be a really big thing for us because I think it matches the general theme that I wanted our builds to have as well, with all of the like pipes and heavy machinery and stuff showing and minecarts going all over. I think Immersive Engineering will match that quite well. So that's why I wanted to do this building first, and on top of that, the resources we're going to be getting for it are also really, really important for some of our builds. So the two main ingredients, the two main components that I want this building to churn out are treated wood and steel. Those are the two main components, and I want those for two reasons. One, both of them are used in pretty much everything in Immersive Engineering. Most structures and most individual blocks use at least one, if not both of them, and on top of that, they both just look really good. For example, this unfinished facade over here, the wood texture in this on the walls is actually the treated wood planks. At least one variation of them, and I like that texture quite a lot. So, we're going to be using a lot of those blocks, and of course with steel we have things like the steel scaffolding, which if we start using it like this, well, we're going to go through thousands of those blocks before we're done, so we're going to need quite a lot of these things. At the same time, because we are going to be getting a lot of slag during our production process of those two blocks, I would also like to create concrete, which, again, this one, it's not necessarily used in the mod itself or anything, but it's just a really, really nice building block. In fact, that is what we made our dam out of over here. Now, obviously, I've had access to these blocks in the past. Here's even more of the scaffolding, for example, but I haven't really had access to them on a mass scale. I've had to create them in very tedious ways using other mods. So that's what we're taking care of this building now, because we're going to need a lot of this stuff, both for Immersive Engineering itself and just for building in general, and crafting it without using Immersive Engineering is kind of a pain. On top of that, I want to make something that just generally looks cool. So, that is going to be our main focus today, and that's what I'm going to be getting to. Before I dive into making the actual structure itself, though, and I will note that I don't know that we're going to finish the actual building today. I mostly want to focus on the functional side of it, partially because I'm kind of struggling with the building stuff, but we'll talk about that later on. Before we actually get to that process, though, I do want to show you guys what is involved, just so you know how simple this is, and so you understand what's going on, because I am going to be obscuring this process with a lot of other fancy stuff. So, essentially, to make all of these resources that I just said and want to do, you only need these two blocks right here, along with some other external stuff, like, gravel and clay and whatnot, just general resources. But, for the most part, you only need two machines to do what I wanted. So this one right here, which is a grid of coke bricks, which is just clay, brick, and sandstone, I believe, you give this a tap, this turns into a coke oven. And essentially this creates, or kind of mimics, a very basic version of the real-life process of creating coal coke, or coke as the fuel source, if you're aware of it. And essentially all we have to do is drop coal or blocks of coal in here, and this will automatically, without power or without additional fuel, convert it into coal coke. It will, at the same time, as a byproduct, give us some creosote oil. So the creosote oil is basically all we need to do the treated wood planks. It's just creosote oil and any planks that we manage to get, so that's really simple. And the coke that we get from this, or the coal coke as it's referred to in this mod, is what we need to move on to create steel. So, we take the coal coke out of there and we take it to this structure. Now, this is the layout that you need in order to create the improved blast furnace. There is a simpler version that doesn't require steel, because each of these blocks is reinforced with an ingot of steel, so it is a little expensive to get into if you haven't done Immersive already. Thankfully, the other mods managed to do that for me. But you set this up, you give this a tap, and it creates this fancy-looking structure here. Now, there is other stuff we can do to this. We can plug some furnace preheaters into the sides, and that'll make it work better. But essentially, all we have to do is drop our coke from this coke oven over here into the top, along with an iron ingot, and that will automatically create steel for us. So that's basically the entire process. We drop coal into the coke oven. It gives us creosote oil to make the treated wood. It also gives us coke. We take the coke and an iron ingot into the improved blast furnace, and that's going to create the steel that we need. Now, this will also output, as a kind of extra thing, a little bit of slag, and that's what we need to do the concrete. So, essentially, all that we need, all of the difficult-to-get resources at least, are contained within these two multi-block structures. Now, we could automate this very, very easily. I could make a little room and just hook up some XNet cables or even just hoppers between these two, and we could automate the entire process very, very simply. But that is very, very boring, right? That's not how I like to do things. I want to do something that's a little bit more animated and a little more interesting looking. So, I'm going to go get to that as soon as I find a suitable location for it. I think I may have to tear down these facades in order to do that, unfortunately. But if I do that, it won't be too big of a deal. I do have them in a creative world when I want to play with them some more. But I'm going to go find a good location for this little factory that we're going to be doing. And I'm going to try and set up at least the very core aspects of its functionality. That way you can kind of see what I'm trying to do. And, well, we'll go from there. So it turns out that Little Tiles really does not like the replay mod. So, gotta remember that for future reference. It's fine to record the Little Tile stuff after it's built, but no building it while recording replays. That is a no-no. Anyway, obviously I have cleaned up our yard a little bit. It honestly feels kind of strange out here not having these tall structures around for the first time in so long. We're gonna have to change that real quick because it feels kind of lonely now. But obviously the new building I've been working on, which I realize you're seeing for the first time now, that is, well, not really feeling that void just yet. It's not entirely impressive. But it'll get there, hopefully. Kind of struggling with the exterior stuff, so I haven't really started it yet. So far, I've just kind of thrown these tank blocks in as a temporary placeholder for our walls. We'll see how all of that goes. But for right now, let's actually dive into the inside and take a look at how all of this is going to function, at least loosely. Do keep in mind that a lot of this stuff is bound to change. Realistically, even every aspect of this may change slightly yet. So, there's quite a lot to cover. I've already tried to record this clip, and it was insanely long. So, let's get to it. Now, the first thing that happens when you walk through our fancy steel doors there is that you're immediately looking down on, I guess we can call this a factory. You're immediately looking down on all of the stuff in the factory. And I really like that perspective, especially once we have all of this up and running. There's going to be a lot of animation and a lot of motion and kind of interesting stuff like that going on in here. So I think that'll be pretty cool. Now, the first step of that process, here's our stairs from down here, by the way. Not entirely happy with them. I think the overall idea is okay. I think that I need to change this sheet metal texture out, and I don't know about this, like, diagonal railing stuff. That might feel a little strange, but I'll deal with that off camera. Now, the first step of this process, before I interrupted myself, is getting coal into the building. Now, obviously, we're dropping the coal here into this, like, bin-looking thing, and this itself may also be changing. We'll talk more about that in a second. But the general idea is that we have some kind of coal containment area, and then we essentially funnel the coal onto this conveyor belt, like so. And basically, when we walk into the building, we'll see the coal blocks kind of falling into the container, right? That's the general idea. Now, as for this area itself, I'm kind of leaning between two different directions here. One, we could just have a big metal holding tank where they store the coal. That's probably the most, realistic approach to it. But I think it might look a little bit cooler and have more character if we instead have a big dirt pit or a big gravel pit where they dump the coal into and keep it kind of in different piles and stuff, and then they shovel it on here. That feels a little primitive considering how fancy this place feels, but I think that would probably look a little cooler. So that's something we'll have to play around with. Anyway, once the coal falls in, obviously that was automatically picked up by a system down below, and that means that we can move it wherever we want to. Now, the end goal of that coal is to move it into our coke ovens, and that's what these four things right here represent. So, this is essentially my own design of a coke oven. It's kind of an amalgamation of the different designs of coke ovens, from the last 100 years. Basically, they used to be big open rooms that you would just kind of throw coal into and cook it, and these days they're a little more fancy. They're these really narrow slits that open up on both ends. This is kind of a combination of the two. So we've got these rooms that you can access by opening the front doors, which I love. This is, of course, little tiles at work, which is just amazing. The only thing that this is missing is a sound effect. I would love to have a big metal door opening and closing sound when these were going up and down. That would be amazing. But basically, we have these empty rooms in all four of these, and we need to get the coal in here, at least figuratively. We need to do something that represents getting the coal in here. I have these hoppers in each one if we want to go that route. That connects to the actual coke oven that's down below. So if we can get the coal into this spot, realistically, that would be pretty cool. And then, of course, we can just, dispense the coal coke back up and extract it out. Now, as for how we actually go about doing that, well, there's a lot of different options. One, we could do minecarts. That was kind of my initial intention, to have a minecart going into each one, and then it would bounce out and, do minecart things. The issue with that is that rails don't look particularly good, at least the actually functional default Minecraft ones. So that would look kind of bad, and it also would interfere with our door, because we can't really put rails over this. So, not great. I don't think that's a very good solution. We could just drop the coal in from the top. We could have a conveyor belt going across, or maybe even have a big bucket hanging by chains, and we could move that around using little tiles. And I think I could make it to where I could make it look like the coal was being dropped in from the bucket into our oven, and then we'd kind of close the door when that was happening. We would cook it up, dispense the coal coke in there, open the door, and then we could pull it out somehow. That's at least partially the idea. So maybe that's a thought, at least, I suppose. The other options, we could just have a visual process where we'd have, maybe we could take this bin here and convert it into a minecart of sorts, and then have that bounce back and forth in front of it really slowly, and that could just be our way of representing the coal being loaded into each one, and then the coal coke being pulled out. That would probably work, I suppose. So that's a thought. Let's see, what would the other option be? Oh yes, the last option, and the one that would probably be the most unique, is to use golems. And this would be the most realistically functional of them. Basically, Thaumcraft, if you're not familiar with it, has these little golems. They're basically like iron golems that are less than a block tall. And you can have them do things for you, including moving items from one inventory into another, or picking items up for you and putting those into an inventory. So that's really cool, and it would work fairly well for this, but I don't know the limitations of those golems. I don't know if I would need 8 different golems to do what I need to do. So we may have to dive into Thaumcraft sometime in the very near future and see if that's a possibility. But as always, if you guys have other ideas for how we can do that, be sure to let me know. We're probably not going to fully automate this process today, just because I'm not sure which of those directions I really want to go in. So, let's say we get our coal in there, it's all processed. Obviously, we're going to get creosote oil as a kind of byproduct of that. That is actually going to flow up through these 2 fluid ducts on either side. Obviously, I could hide those down below, but I thought it'd be kind of cool to see the fluids, as a byproduct of our process, flowing around. So, I like that. We'll see how that looks when it's all up and running. And the coke itself will whether via golems or via some kind of contrived minecart-looking thing. However it ends up happening, we're going to transport coke from our coke ovens to this conveyor belt. At least that was the idea here. Realistically, I'm probably going to change this, because it doesn't really work as well as I thought it would. So the idea is that we would drop our coke onto the conveyor belt, and we could kind of see it moving along in the ground. You know, the whole keeping things animated and getting a lot of motion thing. I like the idea, it just doesn't really work very well in practice. Like, we've got like these holes in the floor, which I can't really fix because the steel scaffolding stuff is a little glitchy. And I don't know. I mean, it just feels like a tripping hazard, you know? So, probably gonna go with something a little different, even if we just, like, raise the conveyor belts up and lead it to this one. I'll explain what's going on over here momentarily. So, that's probably going to be changing. But the idea was basically that it would transport all the way over here, up this way, and then go into this item router, which would dispense items wherever they needed to go. Now, if those items go this way, they would go to the item assembler. And essentially, this is just an auto crafting system. So we could automatically craft, say, our treated wood planks here. We would send in planks from somewhere, like we could dispense them into the back of the item router, have them go this way, and then there's a fluid input down here that we could put our creosote to. So this would automatically create our treated wood planks for us whenever we needed them. Same with the concrete or anything we wanted to crank out with steel. We could just send them through this. It would automatically craft them and then send them over here where we could automatically pick them up. The rest of the area is just kind of like a storage, kind of shipping, processing area. It's a little crammed in here, honestly. Should probably take a snooze. Yeah, it's a little crammed in here, so I may actually change the layout so that the assembler is down below, because we have all of this space down here that I'm not really sure what to do with otherwise. So I may put the assembler down here and then have like a little elevator type thing to take the items up top. And then eventually we'll have like a big garage door right here, and they'll load out the stuff through the front over here. That's at least my vision. Obviously, it's kind of hard for you guys to tell what that's going to look like just yet. And honestly, it's kind of hard for me to tell. But that's the plan. So that's what's going on over here. Obviously, this entire section is looking pretty lacking. That is what the blast furnace looks like with the two preheaters on it. But, of course, I'm actually going to be building a custom blast furnace. The issue here is that I'm not entirely sure how I want to design it. The design that I would like to go with, which is inspired by the blast furnace from World of Warcraft in the Blackrock Foundry dungeon. High five if you know what I'm talking about. But that's kind of what I want my inspiration to be drawn from, but it's huge. Like, it's absolutely massive, and conveying it in Minecraft is even harder. So I may have to take some kind of creative liberties of my own with its design and try and figure out something that fits in this area, because I don't want it to be too big, right? I don't want it to be, like, impractically large. So I need to figure out a design for that, but that's what's going to be going over there, is a custom blast furnace type design. And I think that covers everything other than these. These are essentially creosote oil tanks, and I don't know how to feel about them, honestly. I like the idea of having creosote oil tanks, but I don't know about this particular design, which is really intricate. It has kind of the same problem that these step things do right there, where it's like pixel by pixel. I don't know if that feels out of place or not. Obviously, this one's a little broken, but you get the point, right? And I would be adding more detail to them. I'd add things like little pipes and make the tops a little more detailed and try and make them feel more interesting. But I don't know. You guys will have to let me know on that. The other option, because I do really like the idea of having a creosote oil tank here, the other option is to have the tank from open blocks. That is essentially a block that we can put, one next to another, and it'll just form one big liquid tank, and then we can pump liquids into it, and it will actually visibly fill up, which is really, really cool. And we could just build a tank out of that, and then wrap it in other blocks, like wrap other glass textures and stuff around it, and then we would have an actual functional creosote oil tank, which is really, really cool. So that's a maybe. I may actually experiment with designs for that stuff a little bit. In fact, that's probably what I'm going to do right now. At this point, there's so many like little uncertainties I have about how I want to design things. I'm probably going to go ahead and experiment with a bunch of different stuff right now. Just a bunch of different little details and a bunch of different building aspects to this. And we'll see how they turn out. Just because I want to convey some of my ideas to you guys. That way you can give me proper feedback before I finalize this build. So, I'm going to go ahead and do that, maybe experiment with some tank designs and maybe the coal area, hopefully try and figure out something for this exterior. I really, really wish I had better brick textures to work with. It is astonishing how few I have. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that, maybe mess with the layouts a little bit, maybe shrink the building a little as well. I'll see if I go that far with it, but there is a lot of wasted space other than this area. We'll see how things go. I'm going to go ahead and get to that, though, and I'll be back with you guys in just a little bit. So that was kind of a weird time lapse, lots of little building stuff going on all over the place, and a lot of this stuff, in fact, pretty much everything I've done so far today, is completely unfinished. Keep in mind that it is purely for the sake of demonstrating certain ideas, and I would really like to get feedback from you guys before we try and finalize any of this stuff. So, all of that being said, let's dive in and talk first about the tanks, since those are up here first. So earlier on, we saw the first option, which is stuff that's purely cosmetic. A storage tank for our creosote oil that isn't actually functional, it just looks cool. And of course, these are unfinished as well. We would add things like pipes and all kinds of details to them. And we could also go different routes with it. We could make them more square so they look more Minecraft-y or anything like that. So that is option number one. Now, I mentioned option number two being to utilize something like this, but wrap it around open blocks tanks. That way it would actually be realistically usable. We could actually fill it up with creosote oil. Unfortunately, that is not going to work. So I kind of realized this as soon as I tested it out, but I wanted to show you what the problem is. Essentially, Open Blocks has a bit of a rendering glitch currently in which the liquids inside actually render over the top of any transparent blocks. So if we look at the water that I put in here, you'll see it actually renders over the top of the glass. And, well, it kind of ruins the effect, right? It wouldn't look very good to do that. So, unfortunately, this is currently not an option for us. If we did want a tank that did visually fill up, however, we could do something more like this. Again, this looks a little bit crummy. I didn't, spend very much time detailing it. But I think that something like this could look really cool. If we have stuff like copper pipes going into the sides, maybe some wire coiling around, and like a big shutoff valve and all of that good stuff, I think this could look pretty neat. And of course, there's, a bunch of open blocks tanks inside. And basically, if we take our bucket here, you can see the liquid level actually changing as it goes in and out. So as our coke ovens were processing and getting more creosote oil, this would be gradually filling up. And then, of course, if we, enabled it to drain this out and maybe go and create some treated wood for us, we would actually see this visibly go down, which is very, very cool, and I like that a lot. Now, this is more limiting, though, as far as like what we can do visually with it, so I don't know which option is best. The other option is to use both. So we could have one big tank that is purely visual and maybe a smaller one, maybe disguise it as like a pump of some kind even, and have that actually be this style. That way we could actually see the creosote flowing. So you guys will have to let me know. Is one style distinctly better than the other? Should we just use both? Should we stick to one? I don't know. So that's the tanks. Next up, let's talk about this mess over here. Obviously, this is not very impressive at the moment, and it's kind of hard for me to demonstrate this fully without spending hours and hours detailing it. But the general idea that I have here is that we would have something like a rail line coming in. Either, an actual functional one using something like Steve's Carts or Railcraft, or maybe something just visual with chisel and bits. But either way, we would have a rail line coming in, like a hand-operated crane to offload it, a bunch of details like that, and maybe make the entire thing kind of like fenced in and do kind of interesting stuff with it. I know right now it looks very plain, but I think going that route, it could have a lot of character. And I think that would definitely look more interesting versus just storing it in like a big metal tank or just having a minecart unloader straight onto the conveyor. I think that would feel a little bit boring by comparison. So I don't know. You guys will have to let me know if this is like a terrible idea, but I think it has a lot of potential. So let's say we get that sorted out. Next, we have to get the coal into our coke ovens. I know I'm going a little quick, by the way. I've already tried recording this clip, and it was ridiculously long. So anyway, next up, we have to get the coal into our coke ovens. And there's a few different ways to do that. As I mentioned earlier, I still want to mess with Thaumcraft golems. We'll probably actually be experimenting with Thaumcraft within the next episode or two. Is the sun setting? Yes. We'll probably be experimenting with Thaumcraft within the next episode or two, so we can see if the golems will be practical for this or not. We'll figure that out. But if they aren't, or even if they are, there's a couple other things we can do. So one of those... What is going on over here? Is that like a spider with particle effects under my floor? Anyway, one of the things we can do is just have something like a minecart slowly going back and forth in front of them to kind of represent the idea that they would be loading the coal from that into the coke ovens. And we could do that after I take a snooze, if I'm allowed. There we go. We could do that with a sliding door from the Little Tiles mod. So something like this. So obviously this looks a little bit silly because it's just a container kind of, dragging across the floor. But if we made this look a little bit more like a minecart, I think that could look really, really cool. And, build like a little rail underneath it. Or even just put wheels on it and make it look like a pushable cart of some kind. I think that could look kind of neat. So that's one option, and that would be a very, very easy option. Probably the easiest out of all of them, because then we would just pipe the coal directly into the coke ovens from down below. And then, of course, we would just kind of randomly have the doors open and close to make it look like they were doing stuff. So that's one option. Another option, which I think I like a lot more, is to have the coal drop in from above. So you could have a bucket like this one. And essentially, we would make the coal look like it was dropping in here. We would probably move our conveyor belt up top here. And then we would send this along. And then as this would drop over, or as this would pass over every coke oven, rather, we would actually drop coal through it. So, for example, it's going to go over this one. And when it would reach right around here, we would dispense some coal. And it would drop through the middle. And we would actually see it drop into the coke oven. And then we could close the door. Right? And then it would finish processing. We could open the door and get the coke out of it. So I think that could actually look really cool, right? Kind of sending this back and forth. And there's ways we could obscure the process of dispensing the coal, so it mostly looked like it was just coming straight down from the bucket itself. So I really like that idea. I think that idea has a lot of potential, depending on how the golem thing goes. We'll see how that goes. But that's kind of where I'm leaning. And even if we go that route, we could also use this at the same time. We could replace the coal in here with a coke texture and say that that's where they're unloading the coke too. So we could drop the coal in from the top, have the coke come out here, and say that it's being loaded into a cart out here. I think that would be kind of cool. So that's all of that. Then we would move on to the blast furnace. Now, obviously, this is not what it would look like. This is very much a placeholder. It's mostly to give you guys an idea of the scale that I'm thinking. The issue with this design is that... Oh my god! That scared the crap out of me. I was... literally threw my mouse and everything. Oh my god. I've not been that scared in a video game in like a long time. It just came out of nowhere, man. Where did he even spawn? I don't even know where he went. What a jerk. Anyway, as I was saying before I was rudely interrupted by my own freakout, the issue with this design is that I can't really detail it the way that I want to. I've tried adding the detail to it that I would like to do, and each time that I try and make it a little more detailed, it gets a little bigger. And by the time it starts looking kind of cool, it's taking up this entire area. It gets just massive. And I don't really know what to do about that, honestly. I have a few ideas of alternate designs, but I haven't really found out, exactly how I want to do them just yet. So, kind of on the fence about that. Anyway, that is a rough scale for that, and the last things I did were relating to the exterior of the building. One, I threw up a simple smokestack. I definitely want to have at least one, probably two of those out back. I would have done two, but I ran out of concrete. But the size of them will obviously vary depending on the size of the building itself once we figure that out. But that is kind of the general idea. It's something that I would really like to have back there. And of course, we could always make the smoke go higher, or we could make it sway over with the wind a little bit, or anything like that. It could look pretty cool, I think. So that's a basic thing. Obviously, it was just kind of thrown together. As for the front of it, I threw on that one style that we had previously, and this is the style that I'd kind of like to use in our industrial areas and kind of the more, kind of seedy, rundown areas, things like that. I like this style a lot for that stuff. And obviously this is, kind of lacking detail. I didn't throw any machinery on it, and there's not really any pipes going on it or anything like that. I'd like to rough it up, maybe crack the walls a little bit, rough up this railing. But the general idea is there. The thing is, I think I only want this style on this part of the building. Like, we have this part that sticks out, right? I want this style on that, but I want the rest of the building to have a slightly different style. Almost like this front section was added later on, or, something along those lines. I think that would be pretty cool. So, I think that's the general idea. The issue here is that I don't really know what I want the back end to look like. I was kind of leaning towards making it look like an old brick factory, but the problem with that is that we don't really have any good brick textures. Surprisingly. I don't know how we don't, but we really don't have any good, weathered-looking old red brick building textures, which is strange. You would think that would be, the first priority of most, texture-adding mods, but no, apparently not. So that's kind of a bummer. We could always make it look a little bit more industrial. We've actually done a style like that in the past when I was experimenting. So that's a thought. I do want to be a little careful about making this feel too industrial, though, because the inside already feels really industrial. I mean, I guess that's partially because of these temporary walls I have in place, but I don't know. It feels really industrial in here. Now, that may change once we add more details in. For example, little copper pipes and all kinds of stuff like that. Maybe have some hanging wires going on. I think that'll help that situation quite a lot when we get to the detailing phase, but I'm not entirely sure. I do kind of want to try swapping out the floor for something that's a little less industrial feeling, though, and I'm kind of leaning towards a wood texture. I'll have to experiment with it. That does sound like a really strange choice in a place like this, but I think it could look really cool and give it a unique feel. So, again, something I'll have to experiment with. Anyway, all of that being said, I think I'm going to leave this project here for today, both because this clip is getting exceedingly long once again, and because, well, I really want to get your feedback before I try and go any further. I don't want to try and finalize anything because you guys may have some really cool ideas that change some of my views on this stuff. So, as always, if you have any suggestions about any of this stuff, the tanks, the coal stuff, whether the coal pits or how we're going to dispense it into the coke ovens, stuff for the arc furnace, or blast furnace I guess it's called, and as well as the exterior, be sure to let me know. So, that being said, I think I'm going to call it here for today. Apologies again for the massive delay. I know I said that I was going to try and avoid it, and honestly I have been trying to avoid it. My brain is just not cooperating with me. But I'm trying. Do bear with me. And hopefully next time we'll be doing something. We'll most likely either be messing with Thaumcraft to get the golem sorted out, or we'll be looking at our power grid situation over at the tree we built ages ago, because I found out earlier today that our power generation is actually running at half efficiency right now due to a change. So we may have to go and fix that. But for today, well, I'm going to call it here. So, thank you guys for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. I'll see you next time.